This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
Flex your business with an American Express Business Gold Card. You'll earn 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 eligible spending categories, like transit and electronics, each month, on up to $150K in combined purchases per year. Plus, you can now earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold, built for business by American Express.
Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast from Brooklyn. I've got Cameron Hastings, and he is the principal at Land Theory. He's also an advisor in the investment space, real estate, and various other ventures. And he's going to talk about all the work that he's doing, what clients come to him for, and I'm really happy to have him on and pick his brain. Cameron, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, briefly introduce yourself. And I know you wanted to come on this podcast to specifically talk about your particular work.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Like you said, I'm based in New York. I've been here for about 12 years now. I started my career here as an architect, working for the architecture firm Gensler, where I primarily worked on designing high-rise office buildings. So I designed close to 2 million square feet of office buildings, both in New York, some in LA, some in DC, both for corporations that were using them for their own headquarters or their own uses, as well as REITs or investment firms. And while I was doing that, particularly working for the REITs and the developers, I realized I was really more interested in what they were doing than what I was doing. That my vision of kind of control over a real estate project was much more limited as an architect. So I learned about how to be a developer. I went back to grad school, got my master's degree in real estate, and then since then have worked as a multifamily developer, as well as a management consultant with Newmark, where I worked across property types, both in the US, a little bit in Europe, a little bit in Asia, across pretty much everything from office, industrial, retail, less residential in that role, but some specialized things like data centers or electric vehicle manufacturing plants. And then in the last couple of years, I've been an investment advisor with my own company, Land Theory, as well as now a partner with Celine Brighthouse, which focuses on unanchored strip centers.
Yeah. And I know you wanted to particularly discuss your work with the last portion that you were talking about. So talk about what people come to you majority for and how you help them solve the problems and answer their questions.
Mm-hmm. So in my work with Land Theory, I work with a variety of types of clients. So whether retail clients or private funds that kind of need a little help growing their firm. And that's how I met my current partner in Celine Brighthouse. About 2.5 years ago, she was contemplating a development project in her local city, Palm Springs in California, that I underwrote for her. And we spent some time looking at it, understanding what made sense about it. She decided not to do it based on our work. But then about 9 months ago, she came back to me with this concept for a new firm that would focus specifically on unanchored strip centers. And for any of your listeners that aren't familiar with that niche of the retail space, the strip center part generally refers to the shape of the building. These are one-story retail centers that we see all over the country, but particularly in more car-dependent markets like California or Texas, where we happen to focus. And the unanchored part refers to the fact that there isn't a big box store, and there typically aren't national or global tenants. It's much more focused on local tenants and more focused on necessity goods and services rather than discretionary goods or services like you would find at a mall or maybe a power center. So they're the smaller scale of the retail, sort of just a step up above single tenant properties, but smaller than power centers or regional malls. And we see a big opportunity in this space based on what's happening in the market.
Yeah, and that's a great segue and introduction, because people that are listening to this who are talking about women investors or women in real estate investing. So the question I have for you is what is the USP for unanchored strip centers now because we have Amazon, we have delivery, all this. What is the USP?
Mhm. So maybe I can back up the story to right before the global financial crisis in terms of retail. When e-commerce first started to gain a lot of traction in the early mid 2000s, there was this concept of the retail apocalypse that we didn't know if we were going to have stores anymore, that maybe 100% of sales were going to go to Amazon or go online. And that both influenced the amount of construction that happened after the global financial crisis, partially because of perceptions, partially because of it was just a very difficult time after that. And we had overbuilt before that crisis. So in the last almost 20 years now, there's been very little retail construction, particularly among these smaller scale properties. And it's turned out that only about 20% of sales are happening online versus still 80% are happening in person. There are definitely businesses that are more challenged than others based on online sales, particularly things like electronic stores, office supply stores, low cost apparel, fast fashion. Those types of stores have really struggled in the digital economy. Other types of stores or businesses where there are things where you can't accomplish them online, like going to the doctor or going to get your hair cut or going to get your nails done or going to the laundromat
Mhm.
or dry clean or any number of things like that that just cannot be done online, or things that are just actually less convenient to do online. Say you have a headache or you're sick and you need to go to the pharmacy to go get some NyQuil. That's typically not something you would order on Amazon unless you can get it in an hour maybe, but most markets still aren't able to do that. So being able to just walk down the street or drive down the street a few minutes to go get that item is actually more convenient than doing it online in many cases.
Mhm.
And the other thing about these centers is that we've seen, because of what's happened in the last few years with work from home trends, people are spending a lot more time in their local neighborhoods. In the past, where they may have relied on downtown retail or retail near their offices for what they would get on a daily basis, now in some cases, people are spending 7 days a week pretty much in their neighborhoods, up from maybe 2 days a week. So these centers that are within their residential communities have become a lot more important. And we've seen that in terms of the resilience of the tenants.
Yeah. And that's a great segue into because this podcast sounds like you partnered with people interested in real estate investing and particularly women in real estate investing. So the how are you addressing common problems and solutions? Talk about this idea of one thing is lack of confidence in investing and how you partnering helps with that.
So our focus, primarily from an investor side, is working with retail investors and particularly women. The rest of the team at Celine Brighthouse is all women and it's majority female owned.
Mhm.
And what we found is that women are, while they've gained a lot of power and wealth, and we're actually at a point where women are being educated at higher rates than men. For early career women, pay is getting to be equal, if not exceeding men's in some cases, in some industries. And based on just current trends, it's not unlikely, it's quite likely actually, that in the next 15, 20 years, American women may actually control more wealth than men based on some of those trends. So we see an opportunity there, just a kind of pure business opportunity, that this market is growing in terms of women investors and that it's been overlooked.
Mhm.
The other part of that, though, is that most of the women that we work with and that we talk with haven't gotten the same kind of investment education that their brothers or male counterparts have. So they in many cases just weren't expected to be the one that managed their family's finances, even though in many cases they are now the breadwinner. So we see cases where women are the ones who are earning the money for their families, but they're still not the ones who are managing it for their families. So we're looking through Celine Brighthouse to help alleviate that through real estate. That we, with this focus on moderately risked cash flowing investments, so they're all existing properties. We're making value add type renovations, but they're more aesthetic and operational than significant construction. So the risk profile is a little bit lower, which aligns more with what women on average are looking for. Women tend to be a little bit less risk tolerant than men, but turns out over the long term, because of that, they actually perform better than men in many cases. So there's this confluence of both the property type being advantageous right now, and this kind of natural fit with women, partially because of where women's kind of financial power is at the moment, but also this connection with retail where women are still doing about 85% of purchasing for their family. So they're the ones who typically are going to these centers. And many of the businesses are owned by women in these centers, whether they're small service or goods-based businesses. So there's the ability to improve women's income and lives on both sides of the landlord-tenant relationship here.
Yeah. And that's a great segue into, because you mentioned the aesthetics and also the decision making. If people are listening to this, particularly the women investors interested in real estate, what are the best markets to look for where they can have a competitive edge?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's two different considerations for women or anyone that's looking to invest in real estate, and that's really what your own capacity is to manage your own properties. For anyone that is capable of managing their own properties, has experience in real estate, maybe has done some projects before, has access to the capital and particularly the debt markets that they're able to do it. Generally, I would recommend doing it in your own home market. It's unless you get to have a large portfolio with a large team, or they're absolute triple net properties where you have no management responsibilities, it's quite difficult for most individuals to accumulate a meaningful portfolio when they're going to each market that may be the hottest next market. And we also see a lot of times when you try to do that, similar to other types of investing, when you see Austin or Miami as these hot growth markets, you end up buying too expensive. And then a couple of years after you've bought, rents are actually going down because there's been so much supply growth. So if you're someone that's looking to buy your own properties, I would recommend first looking in your own market. What we've done, and we're doing a similar thing. So the two other partners in Celine Brighthouse, one is based in Southern California, one is based in Dallas, Fort Worth, and they've both respectively lived in those markets for 40 plus years with involvement in real estate most of that time. So we follow our own advice that we're focused on our home markets, one, because we know them, but also because within this particular property type, those are the two largest and most liquid markets. So within just Southern California and Dallas, forget the rest of the country, about 15% of all of these strip centers are within those two markets. So we also like that we can be within markets where we have a lot of options on the acquisition side, as well as on the exit side. And that's important for us because we're considering the potential to sell these properties as a portfolio rather than one by one. So focusing on a market that already has a lot of institutional investment and experience and infrastructure in terms of their teams already being there makes that portfolio exit more feasible than, again, if you have one property in a bunch of different markets around the country, especially if they're smaller tertiary markets.
Yeah. In Dallas and Austin are my backyard because I'm in Texas. In particular, what kind of challenges do women face in real estate investing compared to their male counterparts?
Mm-hmm. I think, and part of this is what I've gotten from my partners and their experience in real estate, but my partner Lori talks all the time about coming to a job site or coming to a meeting of owners, of which she is usually the primary sponsor, if not a co-GP, and the assumption that she is the interior designer or that she is the architect. So there's a lot of women get dismissed a lot more than men, especially in real estate, which is still dominated by men. There are some subsets like residential brokers. Most of those are women, about 60%. Property managers in terms of the kind of on the ground work is primarily women, but basically everything else in real estate is dominated by men. So it can also just be difficult to be in the room where you're the only woman and you don't have, even if you do have the experience, it can feel like you don't because you maybe think that all these men have more experience than you do. And that's part of what we're trying to alleviate with Celine Brighthouse is creating a community of women that want to be in real estate, may have their own resources, but may not, and it may be more advantageous for them to be passive investors, but within a group or a community of women where they can learn together. So we see instances where we may bring together a group of women and then they may do something else together, whether it's real estate or venture capital or private equity. They may form another kind of investment group. And that's part of what we're looking to do, both through what we're doing on the investment side, as well as our investor education that talks about all these topics.
Interesting. And real estate is all about location. And the next thing is capital. If you don't have capital, you can't compete. Are funding for women real estate investors, is it different? Are there grants or loans? Are there particular strategies that women can use to surpass the gender bias? Talk about that.
Mhm. So there are some kind of grants and loans that are specifically for minority and women-owned businesses. Depends on the market. They're often at the city or the state level, so it depends on exactly where you are. But I would say that real estate is a little bit different than if you have a startup, for example, and you need venture capital funding or something like that, where women still only get 1 or 2% of venture capital funding. Real estate is a little bit different in that you own this property, you're managing the property, but you're less the kind of face of the property. It's not, you're going to sell this. It's more about how long you're going to hold it, what you're going to do while you own it, rather than this is my company and I'm the CEO of this. You are, but it's a little bit different. So I think that in a way, women can actually have an advantage in real estate because it's more about what the property is going to be able to do, what you can do with the property, rather than just what you will be able to do in terms of building your company. So in a way, even though it hasn't happened on a widespread way, I think that women can actually have an advantage in real estate in terms of that access to the capital.
Hmm. The reason why I love real estate is it's also basically it's a capital asset, and you have different strategies, but there's different things for depending on what your particular advantage or disadvantage is, and there's always hurdles. So it's great for the entrepreneur. Is scaling a real estate portfolio different from a man versus a woman? Talk about that.
I don't think it's significantly different. I think that there's different, definitely in my experience of working with women, women work a little bit differently than men. It's a little bit more collaborative rather than antagonistic, and they both work in different situations. They can both have their merits. But I think in some ways, especially if you're talking about a community of women investing together, it can, in some cases, work better than in a community of men doing the same, where there's a little bit more jockeying for egos. And not to say that doesn't happen among women, but the degree of willingness to give a little bit away so that you, as a whole, you can gain more, I think is more prevalent among women investors than men.
And on the same notes of what I love is your work with Celine Brighthouse is you talked about community and you talked about women are more collaborative. So if a woman entrepreneur, doctor, dentist, lawyer is hearing this, and how can she network with other women in real estate investing? Are there what tools, resources, books, courses are there for women to succeed in real estate?
Yeah. So there are a ton of small groups about how to do this yourself. What I typically see is the kind of advice that's, oh, just start out by buying 50 apartments and then you're going to have 500 apartments in 3 years. That doesn't really work. If you start out with a huge amount of capital, maybe you can do that. But for the average investor, that isn't really a reasonable thing to do, especially like you're saying, if you are a doctor or you are a lawyer, you have a demanding career that needs its time in itself. So building a portfolio that way is difficult. What we do at Celine Brighthouse and what we recommend for most investors, again, depends on your own capacity, is looking for sponsors that you can invest with, sponsors that you trust, that align with your values and your objectives, rather than trying to do it all yourself. And that can also be a way for you to learn. So maybe your first couple investments in real estate are not something you manage directly, but you found a sponsor who's willing to share a lot of information, who's willing to teach you about how this works. And that's a lot of what we do. We have a weekly or every other week, what we call Empower Hour, where we have an education session that's either something that we're teaching. So I taught a course recently, just about a 90-minute session, where I went through all the different possible vehicles that you can use for real estate, from direct ownership to private funds to things like hedge funds to even derivatives in the public markets, and all the different kind of property types that you can invest in, which is, depending on how you categorize them, is more than 30 different property types. So when you take all of those different vehicles, the different strategies, and the different property types, let alone the different markets, the combinations are enormous. So the diversity of what you can do within real estate is just spectacular, and part of what I really like about it.
Yeah. Lastly, how can people find you and connect with you, contact you, and learn more about your work with Celine Brighthouse?
So they can either go to celinebrighthouse.com or they can email me at cameron@celinebrighthouse.com.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed this conversation. It's really interesting, your breadth of knowledge, and just keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too.